Okay, so for the next, I've been given an hour, but hopefully it will be shorter than that. I know Friday evening is prime time for everybody. Um, Having been in corporate many years ago, about 10 years ago, I decided to get into coaching. And over these past 10 years, I've had the pleasure of working with many multinationals, many professionally managed companies. I work with founders, startups, co-founders, CEOs, and of course, senior executives. Currently, it's my 54th engagement over 10 years, so it's been a fair bit of experience. And I thought I'll share a little bit about executive coaching. Some of you in your organizations might have already gone through it. Some of your organizations might be considering it. But I thought I would try and do two things really. We'll talk a little bit about executive coaching as a discipline, if you like. What does it entail? What typically happens? But as a person who 10 years ago decided to become an executive coach myself, if any of you have any aspirations of have a question or two, I'm happy. Am I audible, Sushma?
Would you want your participants to mute themselves? We're hearing multiple.
I hear a fair bit of crosstalk, so.
I request all of the participants to mute it. Sorry, Anna, not unmute.
Good. There's no better spectacle than mute spectators. So.
Just a question. Is this audio only or visual? I think. This is this only audio or something? Presentation you will be sharing?
Actually, the presentation Hello?
Yeah.
As host, you should be able to mute people in case if you see noise coming from the door.
How do I do that, please?
Okay. Go to the right side and mute where the noise is coming from.
Want me to go and mute everybody?
And whoever is making noise. No, there is an option to mute everybody as well.
Yeah.
For the host, yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Sushma here. I'll mute everyone, sir. Wait.
Don't mute me.
Yeah. Actually, in our previous session and all, by default, all were mute. We are testing the new one. Maybe there is something. Click here too.
Shall I go ahead? Sushma, there was one other question whether this is an audio only or is it a video as well? So.
It's audio only, but video, if you want to show your face, you can do that as well, sir.
Do the participants get to see it?
Yeah, you can just go to near your name and you can click on video icon.
Okay, let me try and do that.
Against your name.
Yeah, I'll do that video. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
You can see your video.
All right, and you can see the presentation as well, right? Okay, so folks, sorry, as always, technology and management clash. So, what I hope to do during this afternoon is, like I said, talk about two perspectives. Typically, the coaching itself, and look at it largely from the coachee perspective. But assuming that some of you are interested in becoming coaches later, I'm happy to take some questions and talk about that as well. Okay. All right. So let's get going then. We start with the classical, of course, not so much a definition as understanding what coaching is all about. So it's really a dialogue, a two-way process. We have had this in a sense in India. Culturally, for many years, we have always handed down things from top to bottom through storytelling, and we have had a very strong Guru Shishya Parampara, which means you have an all-knowledgeable person who educates and passes on knowledge to people below who further it. There is a slight difference in coaching. It is not so, as we'll see a little later, it's not so much about telling a person what to do as to help a person find answers and solutions. And that's where all our spiritual heads and religious heads have had that kind of an approach. And so that's really what it is, a powerful dialogue between a coach and the person that we coach, we call a coachee. The important thing is these are not vacuous conversations. They are held with a very specific purpose in mind, which is to help achieve a result, which is normally making the coachee a far better professional. At the end of the day, coaching is an exercise in change management at a personal level. It is a transformation, and you do that by two things. One is understanding the current context of the coachee, and then by probing, by asking a series of questions, really getting to the bottom of the problem. Some of you who've been engineers, root cause analysis is what we would call it as. So really get to the root of the problem and then help provide insights and answers. So that's the context coaching comes from. It is about, when you talk of transformation, obviously there is a changed human being, and therefore in a sense you are getting rid of an old and reinventing yourself. And you do that by looking at the context, you look at new stories, new identities, and really how do I reinvent myself. Coaching is not an open-ended sort of all-pervasive thing. There is a boundary, there is a very specific business context, and we work within that. It specifically addresses a coachee's requirement. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but we do that through a sort of 360-degree process, and therefore it is need-based. We want to ensure that the coachee senses a bit of urgency, and therefore it is time-bound. The normal sort of recommended coaching duration is 6 to 12 months for executives, and Marshall Goldsmith is known to take up to 24 months with very senior chief executives of very large companies, for the reason that adult change is very difficult. The last interesting thing about coaching is it's not just a feel-good conversation at the end of which the coach raises invoice. There has to be a measurable and positive improvement, and also talk about how we measure that a tad later. The whole thing is there is a lot of water that flows under everybody's corporate bridge, right? We come to a position that we occupy. We are where we are based on a whole host of factors, circumstances, people who have all helped us get there. Very often, in the context that we are in, and often possibly stuck in, there are some hurdles, some obstacles, some challenges that are in our way. And the whole idea is to reimagine that in such a way that we look at how do we overcome these hurdles by looking at blue sky opportunities. And the coach helps the coachee look at those and to achieve the desired state. So that's again a very important thing. Continuing with what is coaching. Coaching is all about learning new tricks. You heard that old adage that it's only a stupid guy who believes that you do the same thing over and over again and you expect different results, right? So it doesn't happen. You need to continuously learn, drop the things that are not working, pick up things that are working, take support of others and feedback and move on from there. So the important thing is to be continuously learning. And just as an aside, one of the questions I often get asked is, let's say you are there for a coaching for 6 to 12 months and the coachee shows visible improvement. What happens when you are gone? Is the coachee likely to continue being that changed individual? That's a tough one. Truth be told that most of us, when there is pressure on us, regress into old ways of working, right, into a comfort zone. So when the pressure of the coach is removed, the coachee may slip. In fact, in large percentage of cases, they do not continue at that high rate of performance. They do slip and slide. But those who are genuine leaders, people who really want to make a difference to themselves, ensure that even when the coach is gone, they continue on that path of change, of learning. So it's actually an individual call, and professionals must decide that even when the coach is gone, they need to continue. In fact, long back I wrote an article called Coach as a Crutch. And so we do use a coach as a convenient crutch when he or she is there. But when the crutch is gone, the coachee needs to learn to walk on their own feet. So, Sushma, do I continue to be reasonably audible?
Sorry, sir? Huh?
Do I continue to be audible? I said.
Yeah, sir, you're audible, sir.
Okay, because I have no way of feedback. There's not a classroom, so just checking.
Yeah.
So they really look at the current context that the coachee is in. What does the organization want, and how does he or she move up into that new desired state? It's very, very important that a coach and a coachee have a very private, a very sacred, and a very confidential relationship. Many of you have been working in organizations, and you understand that when you're giving a 360 or when you're giving a feedback about somebody, if you really want that person to improve, you have to talk about what is not working with that person as much as what is working with the person. So as a coach, when I go and interview some people, right, one of them may tell me something about the CEO or something about others in the organization to explain the point, but all such conversations remain completely confidential. It's up to the coachee if he or she wants to say anything to the organization, but nothing ever emanates from my lips, even when I'm talking to the CEO who sponsors the project, about what is being said. So that's a very, very important aspect of coaching. You have to respect the confidence that the coachee possesses in you. And that helps them freely discuss, talk about the pluses and the not so good things. And therefore, you really get to know the individual what's and all. And that's obviously a very important part. There is a branch of coaching called group coaching, and that obviously has a fraternity or a community of people that you're coaching. Yoga, for instance, is a good example of a group coaching, meaning one guru and many people who are learning at the same time. Typically, executive coaching tends to be one-on-one. So it is individual, it is tailored to that individual, and seldom do you find a sort of one-size-fits-all. To give you an example of the 54 cases that I said I've coached or I'm coaching, there are possibly 20 plus different behavioral areas that you are working on. So it's not as if everybody, has only one problem: communication. So if you look at a classic definition, we looked at coaching as a discipline, as a principle. If you were to look at executive coaching, which is a sub-branch of that, the most important thing here is it is a sacred relationship between a coach and a client or a coachee. And it tends to be largely behavioral in nature. So what we are not trying to do is coach somebody into understanding all about GST. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously understanding and keeping up with the current is very important, but those are what we call hard skills. So somebody can go to a classroom or attend a Chartered Accountant Institute evening lecture and understand about those finer points of GST. So that's not what we are talking about. In executive coaching, typically we tend to work with coaches on the behavioral side, right? And that's the part, and therefore it makes it touchy-feely and a little bit more difficult. But if attempted and if achieved, obviously the change is much more permanent. So that's an important part, that it is about soft skills. A very important thing, I keep getting asked questions, it's again cultural. In US, people brag, they ask somebody to hold their office for 1 hour because they're going to go see their shrink, right? So seeing a psychoanalyst or shrink is not considered abnormal in US. It's a badge of honor to say you're straightening yourself up. And in a very similar fashion, in US or in the Western world, shall I say, many people are afforded an executive coach. Senior executives who are doing well and need to continue to perform well are actually given the benefit of an executive coach. Whereas in India, coaching is still seen as something that is taboo, something that is remedial. So I very often, when I walk into a company and I have to chat with somebody who's been picked by the management for coaching, right? The first thing that coachee asks me, or potential coachee asks me, is what is wrong with me? Why am I being coached? What is wrong with me? But obviously coaching has not been positioned. The correct way to position it is in your second bullet, that these are actually high performers. They are high potential, high performers. They have a track record in the organization. They're doing very well. And yet, truth be told, that between our potential and actual reality, there is a gap, right? And so very often, people who are picked up for coaching are high performers. And the organization would like the coach to work with that high performer individual to identify and see if the hurdles can be overcome so that the high performer gets even into a higher orbit. So it is not remedial. So please don't think of coaching as a remedy. Coaching is augmentative. You're already very good. I'm only helping take you to the next higher level. So it's all about working with the executive, with the coachee, to understand the context, help them see what a reimagined future can be, what kind of actions or steps need to be put in place, stay the course in the initial stages, and help the coachee come up to the next level. It's actually a very tailored, individual specific, as we have said before. And the most important thing is, while we are working with a coachee to help them overcome some behavioral areas where they need improvement, it is very, very important to understand that they have a bundle of strengths, understand the strengths, and preserve them. I'll just talk about this for 1 more minute. When we do a 360 and we want to find out about the coachee, and as you know, it's called a 360 because very often we talk to their manager or managers in the matrix world, we talk to the peers, and of course their subordinates and direct reports, and hence the 360. The first thing I do when I start, if you were to start with an open-ended question to say, tell me a little bit about Dash, somebody is going to say, what an eyesore he is, what an idiot he is, how pompous he is, he keeps talking on and on. And before you know it, the floodgates of litany and complaints have started, right? And that's a human nature. When you ask for feedback, people assume you want to know the worst about the individual. It's very important to start on a positive note. So I always categorically tell the people, can you tell me the signature strengths you see in this individual you're working with? What are the strengths? And then immediately they say, well, very fine individual, a good husband, or a terrific colleague, a great party through, whatever it is. But they start with the positives. And once you've set that context, you now tell them, okay, so what are the areas you think the person could improve upon, develop upon? And psychologically what it does, it forces that person to soften the kind of words that they're going to use and be a little bit more balanced. Even though they're giving development feedback, they don't start with a negative start. So this is very important, that you need to understand the individual strengths, you need to preserve them even while we are attacking their weaknesses. I've said a lot about what is executive coaching, but typically you might be wondering by now, right, so what are some of those behavior areas that I've talked about? What are some of the expected outcomes of these coaching engagements. And you can see those in italics and bold. Typically, again, remember I told you it's largely about behavioral. So many phrases that you see are what we were taught in our organizational behavior, OB1 and 2. Achieving effective leadership, being more effective, ability to manage, which is what a manager does. You can replace it with a capacity to lead when you move from a manager to a leader. The next one is important, psychological and social competencies, right? How does this person develop a sort of balanced approach, a softer approach? For instance, I'm working with a managing director in Accenture. And the area that I'm working with is the person is a very, very accomplished person, right? Has done very well, has become a managing director in a fairly short while, very hardworking personally. But they make a demand of their individual to be, of the subordinates to be equally committed with almost no personal life, right? And so while the person is very driven and committed, they expect the same thing from all their subordinates. And we are trying to see, can the person understand the implications and see how to soften the kind of expectation that they have of their subordinates. Capacity to learn and grow. Very often, most of us believe that since we have passed out of IIM Bangalore, we have learned everything that is to be learned, right? So there really isn't a need for being alive to this. Nothing could be further from the truth. And therefore, helping the coachee continuously look at what is going on. In fact, as a management consultant, I found one of the things which was very important to be one step ahead of the client, for instance, was to look at mega trends, right? What is happening in the industry, what are the new things on the horizon, and getting there before competition does. Okay, improving the coach's ability to manage their career. For instance, I'm working right now with a Big Four. Two of their senior executives that I'm working with were eligible for promotion to partner, but they've been told that they're performing very well, client is very happy, but for 2 years in a row, they've been passed up for being made a partner, right? And so I'm working with these two people to see what are the things that are required for a partner and what are the qualities that they are not exhibiting, which is therefore preventing them from achieving what they need. Technically very competent, client is delighted, they know their subject matter, they know the industry very well, you can't find a flaw there. But obviously on the softer behavioral side, there is something that is preventing them. I'm working with them to understand. So that's a very typical case of career management. Stress, we all know. And more importantly, and I'm sure many of the people, I have no way of knowing the profile of the people who are in on this call and how young or otherwise they are. But I can tell you, when I look at what, when I coach some of the junior executives especially, work-life balance has become a very, very important concern, right? And I'm not even joking when I say, for the younger lot, and for many of us oldies, for us, we were wedded to an organization and the wife came second, right? I find, as an observation I'm saying, that work-life balance is very important for them. And I half joke when I say they choose life over work, right, in the work-life balance. And that's one of the reasons why when I deal with some of my coachees, they're trying to figure out how to motivate and get their juniors to perform at a high level, within the constraints of the timing and their work habits and whatever else. So all this is fine. This is what is to be attempted, etc. So what do coaches actually do, right? You might be a little curious to know what do coaching sessions look like, how do they go? So here are a few insights into that. The first and foremost is powerful conversation. Coaching is all about sitting down, virtually shooting the breeze. It's not unknown for a coaching. I sit down in front of my coachee, we wish each other good morning, and then my opening sentence might be, so what's happening in your life? Tell me all, right? No pre-prepared, it's not a Q&A, it is just allowing the conversation to evolve and making sure that you egg the person on to disclose a little bit more about something they're saying. A simple thing like one conversation, you ask him, how's it going? And the guy says, great. Next time you ask him, the coach says, good, right? If you're a good coach And if the conversation is happening, let's say 1 month apart, you heard the coachee say great once and the next time they say good. That's a great conversation to pick off with. You say, hey, wait a minute, last time you told me things were great, this time you say they are good. What's happening? Anything negative? And then the coachee might start opening up. So engaging in powerful conversations. One of the very important things that, I was in consulting, I headed PwC consulting, and one of the things that we were taught was to lead with a point of view or a solution to a client, their industry, their problems. So consulting was all about telling a client what to do. Coaching is just the opposite. Coaching is about listening. Coaching is about empathetic listening, allowing the coachee to find alternatives and solutions. So you won't believe when I tell you, even now when I go into a coaching session, I have to remind myself before I go in that dash, this is a coaching, not a consulting session. Shut up and listen, right? So listening becomes very important. Empathizing, empathetic listening is the #1 skill to be a good coach. I can tell you out of turn, even without waiting for question answers, such of you who are very keen on becoming a coach, you have to introspect and figure out what style of personality do we have. Because if you're one of those very driven, overbearing personalities who's very successful because you get your job done and do it faster and better than your colleagues. But if your style is treading on dead bodies to get to the top, let me alert you that coaching may not be the best profession for you. Coaching is absolutely about empathizing, about putting yourself in the other's shoes, giving them the benefit of doubt. And in fact, I can tell you, I also certified myself from CFI. And one of the statements we make in CFI when we meet our coaches is to say, my loyalties are 100% in your corner, right? I'm here to fight for you, to make you successful. The organization is an important cog in the wheel, but 100% of my loyalties lie with you, right? And it's very important for the coachee to have that sense of comfort that you are not going to sidey up on behalf of the management and thrust their agendas down his or her throat, but rather you're there for that person and you're going to do everything possible to make them successful. A couple of other important things in that bullet, I just wanted to talk about it. One is confront a coachee. There are times when you know the guy is fibbing. You know, they're supposed to have done something, they don't meet your eye, they're shifty, they're answering. And then you have to push back at them and say, you know, I don't believe you. Give me an instance. Can I talk to somebody to know that you've actually done this? So by confronting and pushing when you think things are not going right, you give the coachee an opportunity to be honest and straight, which is, of course, one of the preconditions. But confronting them for lack of evidence is one. Challenging them. For instance, very recently, I was working with a very senior executive in Bosch, right, the German multinational. Now, Bosch, as you know, I like them as a company, please, I have nothing against them. But being one of those old European companies is very, very process-driven, right? Nothing wrong in that, but what it also means is that people are so worried about non-conformance of processes that they would rather conform than come up with anything out of the box or anything different, right? Because conformance is very important for them. And this person, this coachee of mine, was now going to move into a newly created department, a newly created role. And I was trying to goad the coachee to have a very powerful vision of, you know, out of the box, a leading kind of supply chain practice and what have you. And the coachee just wouldn't bite. And when we dug deeper into the conversation, what emerged was because of the way the organization generally performs, and therefore and of course they're doing very well, large market share. So there was really no need to do anything, no daring to. And so this person was a conformist and a very low risk taker. And when he had a chance to set up a new department, rather than try and create something that was completely out of the box, leading, could even have been showcased in the Bosch worldwide, the person chose to go with a trusted, well-known, staid model, right? And I realized that all because the person was a non-risk taker, low risk taker. And therefore, I had to confront the person. I had to challenge the person and say, why the hell would you not want to do? This is brand new. There is nothing in front of you. Whatever you do is going to be accepted. Why can't you make it world class? Why do you want to be incremental, right? And after a couple of conversations, finally, the person decided to try something very different from what they were used to. Jury is still out. It's very early stages. But through challenge, you're able to move the position of a person. That's very important. And of course, encouragement. All of us have a little childiness waiting for a pat on the back, a candy to be given when we get an answer right. And the coach is looking for it too. And therefore, when you listen to their story and they've done something right, reinforce it, encourage it. That's important. The coaching is not about all the things we did wrong in the past. It's about doing things well in the future. Marshall Goldsmith, all of you have heard of him, very famous book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I'm fairly certain most of you would have read it. One of the underpinnings in that, if you recall, is he says, I don't want to talk about feedback, and he coined the term called feed forward. And the simple reason is say, what is done, it's water under the bridge. I can't do a thing to turn the clock back, but I can certainly do something different in the future. So don't tell me how I screwed up in the past. Tell me what I could do differently in the future, right? Feed forward, a very nice term, but the whole thing therefore is forward-looking rather than beating ourselves on our head over the past mistakes. One of the things that I personally feel a little hampered with, I can share with you, half the coaches I find are people with very senior, very experienced background in HR in the industry, right? Very senior HR professionals who become coaches. And when I sit with them and we are talking about a variety of things, I realize one thing which they really, or at least most of them do understand, is this whole thing about the psychology of people. They are taught, they are trained. Many, if you do 2 years in XLRI, you do a lot of courses in that. So they understand the psychological dimension very well. And I can tell you, as a linear thinking analytical engineer, I found that a little difficult in the beginning. So I took a couple of extra courses on things like psychometric testing, right? All of us in IIM, we administer some questionnaire, some tools as we call it, and those psychometric tests and tools don't come naturally to a person like me. And therefore, even as a coach, you have to make sure that you evolve and learn whatever needs to be done to be comfortable with the uncertainty. We talk about a VUCA world, but the ambiguity of a human psyche is amazing. And so exploring the psychological dimension becomes very important. For instance, in one of my coaches, the coach, very well qualified, a chartered accountant, worked in a Big Four, everything was going well. And yet I found there was something which didn't seem to be right. His heart was not on the job, commitment seemed much less, and so on and so forth. In one of the conversations, I asked him to tell me a little bit about his earlier childhood and where he grew up. We had a conversation, but I dug a little deeper. And then I found that the person's father was a drunkard, didn't really hold a steady job, and therefore his mother had to carry a lot of the burden, doing small things. He started doing things in part-time even when he was school, right, over Saturdays, Sundays, selling ballpoint pens kind of thing. So I had a real tough childhood, and therefore, obviously you can well imagine that for him, his father was a bit of a villain. Right? You can just imagine a child's mind, and the father figure becomes a bit of a villain. And when he joins the job, you transport that villainy to your boss, because the boss is a person who is now that father figure, so to speak, right? The person who controls instead of the household, the office hold. And therefore, unwittingly, unknowingly, without even being conscious of it, the person was seeing his boss as an image of his father. In other words, a control freak who didn't really earn his respect, and therefore there was a little bit of a rebellion in him. The moment we had that conversation and I let it sink in, the person immediately realized that there was an explanation for it. There was a very strong underlying psychological reason for it, but it wasn't right. And believe me, immediately from the next week onwards, the person's perception of his boss changed because he didn't see him as a villain, but rather saw him as a senior authority. And a lot of this dysfunctional behavior that this coachee was exhibiting diluted, right? So sometimes these psychological underpinnings are important. It's something that doesn't come naturally to some of us, and I think it's worth investing in. The last thing on this I wanted to talk about is most of us have our pet beliefs, right? There is still a society in US that believes that the sun rises in the west, or the earth is flat, right? These societies actually exist with membership worldwide. And these are what we call as self-limiting beliefs. SLB we call them, and self-limiting beliefs can hold us back, and therefore it's very important to be aware of it and make sure that we don't get trapped by it. Sorry, I'm just going to take it. Okay. So what do guys like me do, right? What do executives? So this is for such of you who are interested in coaching as a career. Some of this might be pointers for you. The important thing that we do is to, at all stages, make sure that the coachee has the pole star in front of them. This whole coaching assignment is about a particular agenda, and we want to make sure that everything we do is actually helping the coachee align and achieve that goal, right? So very important to make sure that you focus and look at what is the situation that we are trying to overcome, and very importantly, rather than look at it from a restrictive view of why we can't do it, what can be done. You know, when I was heading Coopers and Library, one of my employees told me much later that in one meeting I told them, don't give me 99 reasons why this can't be done. Give me the one reason how it can be done, right? Developing opportunities, looking for those becomes a very important thing. And the coaching, the reason why a coach is very helpful is the coachee is constrained by self-limiting beliefs, the context, and you should be able to open their minds to some other possibilities, some other things that can happen. The coach morally owns a responsibility with the coachee to ensure that things are done. So there is a mutual nature of relationship. So it's not only the coachee's job. If a coachee fails, a coach fails with him or her. That's important. Being focused on results, I've already mentioned. Coaching sometimes also helps in drawing analogies and instances from outside the system. In fact, I want you to know that a lot of executive coaching, the underpinning comes from sports coaching. And if you look at some of the greatest sports coaches who have taken a dumb team and finished with, a Super Bowl or World Cup, you would realize that sports is a fantastic ground for leadership development. So we take a lot of analogy from other professions as well. And most importantly, the funny thing with coaching is, the joke in our community is nobody retires, they become a coach, right? Why? Because all it takes is 275 rupees to print 50 visiting cards to say, Dear Ashok, executive coach, right? Because unlike medicine or chartered accounting or many of these, there is no body which is actually certifying you, looking at your competencies and whether you are upholding ethical standards like the Hippocrates Oath and so on, right? And therefore, it beholds on the profession to make sure that they are ethical. I want to spend a few minutes about typically what happens in a coaching engagement. There are many ways of doing it. One is from first principle. That means I haven't done any coaching as such, but I've been a very senior, successful manager. I believe I can coach. So I start talking to people, giving them some advice, and it works, it doesn't work. So one can be a very freewheeling coach. But as always, as with consulting, as with supply chain or many of the other disciplines, having a framework, having a structure, having a way in which you approach these problems can actually have a good effect because it makes you consistent. It makes you less prone to oversights and errors. So since I qualified with CFI, the methodology I follow is what CFI follows. The brain behind this whole methodology is somebody called Gerard Egan, E-G-A-N, Egan. And he has this whole thing on positivity, right? The underpinning of Egan's, the whole skilled helper model that I've talked about is positivity. What does that mean? Each of us as human beings has been born with a fantastic capacity and capability on many dimensions. It is just waiting to be unearthed, right? So the whole belief is one of positive, that each one of us has it in us to be very, very successful. Something that is stopping us needs to be removed. Many of you might remember that famous statement, when a famous sculptor was asked that, my God, how do you take a block of rock and make such a beautiful sculpture out of it? And it was Picasso actually who said, well, it's very simple. All you've got to do is chisel away the parts that don't belong there, and you have the sculpture that you want, right? So you take a monolithic mass, chisel away the things that you don't need, and you have very successful leader. That's really what positivity does. So it truly believes that the coachee is fantastic potential, is capable of achieving it, if as a coach we are able to surface those that are coming in the way and help them overcome it. Very simply put, that's really all coaching is about. So what we do in the skilled helper model is we actually follow what we call a 3-stage or a 3-phase approach, right? The first and foremost is where is the coachee, what is the current context, what is going on. Some of you, either consultants or have heard the term, when you look at a process, you look at what we call as the as-is process, what it is today, for what it's worth, whatever, what's and all, what is the process today like, or what is the situation like. So that is the first part, which is really a snapshot of the current status. It has a lot of baggage, it has a lot of history, over time it has come to this state, but it's important to understand that. So the first stage therefore is what's going on. The second stage is, okay, now that I have an understanding of what is going on, again borrowing the analogy from consulting and process, once you understand the as-is process, you really want to look at a desired state, what we call the to-be process. So human beings also are as-is in an organization. I need to find out what is the to-be state. Is it a CEO? Is it head of the department? Is it quitting corporate and joining NGO? Whatever is appropriate for us, helping find that to-be state. And the one in the middle, which is the important part where the miracle happens, is the transformational part, where you work with the coachee. Sorry, my apologies. Where you work with the coachee and help them find the path to new way. So just to look a little bit deeper into each of those stages, the first thing, as I told you, so what's going on, right? So really speaking, what I'm asking is the coachee to tell me his or her story. But we have a very famous saying in consulting, you're not looking for the story, you're looking for the story behind the story. Think about that for a minute, that I'm telling you something, but what I'm asking for is a story behind the story. So if one could take a current example, if a Prime Minister Narendra Modi did something in Kashmir, such as, for what it's worth, an abrogation of say 370, is that the end game, or is there something behind it? And this is like a game of chess, a move of pawn for a final checkmate. Are you with me? So what is the story? But I'm actually listening for the story behind the story. What is the underpinning? What's really keeping the person there? We then help the person imagine a lot of new situations, new perspectives, and that's really what we help find out. And we look at the individual strengths and the capabilities and the potential, and how can we leverage all of that to work on the new perspectives to become a new person. Okay, that's the brief part in stage 1. In stage 2, there are always multiple options, right? There are many ways to skin a cat. The question is which is most efficient. Or of course, if you're a SPCA kind of person, don't skin the cat at all. So what solutions make sense for me is the important part. And just as we talked about new perspectives, we also talk about the many possibilities that exist to help you get there. For instance, do you want to go back to college? Do you want to shift to a different department? Do you want to work with a new boss? What is it that you want to do to be able to overcome whatever rut you're facing, right? Wherever you're stuck at the moment. What are the possibilities? And how are you going to use your strengths and leverage them? So once you've identified the axis and where you want to go, you now say, all right. Let's take an example, a concrete example, so we're not talking in vacuum. I was working once with a very senior vice president in a pharma company, and the agenda was assertiveness, right? Decisiveness and assertiveness. These were the two dimensions we wanted to work on. What does that mean? In practice, the person was head of, say, analytics, not the computer analytics, but the clinical analytics. So after a lot of research and finding and everything, they would say a molecule was good to go or not good to go, right? And this would be tabled on a Monday morning meeting. This person, senior VP, along with his top few members of the team would be there, and they would make a presentation and they say, our feeling is that this is good to go. Or sometimes they would say, our feeling is this is not good to go. Immediately, the marketing person would pounce on him and say, what rubbish, I know for a fact that there is a major market for it, I'm going to go ahead with it, right? And this person would crumple and not say anything back. They would come back and his employees would ask him, his direct reports would ask him, boss, you had a wonderful opportunity, you've done all the hard work, you have facts and figures, why couldn't you push back at that guy? Why couldn't you tell him this is not good to go for the following reasons? And of course, it's because this person, old world, didn't want to clash swords with a person in public, didn't want to raise his voice, so he accepted as not, right? Which obviously was very wrong, because the organization might go ahead with a certain drug which was bound to fail. This guy knew it, but got convinced by someone else. And therefore, we had to work on this assertiveness piece. So it was very nice. We decided on a series of things to do, and he actually practiced it. And 3-4 months later, his colleagues told me it was far more assertive. That Monday morning, he pushed back at another senior VP who was close to the CEO with facts and figures, and they were all very surprised. But for me, the interesting part was next meeting, we typically have a meeting once a month. So next month when I had gone for a meeting, this coachee tells me, that's, a very interesting thing happened. My wife and I go for a walk every morning. For the last 27 years, we've been going for a walk around this park near our house. So today morning also we were going for a walk as usual. They had only one daughter. As you can imagine, apple of their eye. So whatever the princess wanted, she would always get. And the princess would ask the mother, and mother would tell the dad and go ahead and do it. So on this particular morning walk when they went, so the mother told my coachee, the senior VP, that our daughter wants to buy so-and-so, which costs a pile of money, wants to buy a so-and-so. And normally the conversation would have been, yeah, go ahead, sounds good, and they would continue. So this time when the mother said daughter wants to buy so-and-so, the coachee told her she's not getting it. For the first time, the mother had ever heard him say anything against. So he said, what's going on? He said, no, she has too many dresses. She's not going to get this. It's too expensive. She doesn't need it. We are not buying it. And so his wife asked him, what happened to you? I've never heard you say this kind of thing before. He says, I'm going through coaching. I've learned to be assertive, and I'm going to put my foot down in the house as much as in office. Okay. For me, the interesting point was, it's very difficult, I realize that it's very difficult to diverse your personality at home and office. It's not like you throw a switch at 5. So 9 to 5 you have one personality, and 5 to 9 you have another personality. So why am I saying this? The change agenda, if it is very valid, if it is very deep and very convincing, your persona changes so much that you carry that with you in other walks of life as well. And of course, the change happens. Most of us know change is very difficult. Adult change is very difficult. But absolute, unwavering commitment on the part of the coachee is what will help them get there. So that's the main part that I wanted to talk about in this. And of course, stage 3, how do I get what I want? Basically ensuring that the coachee has a continued opportunity to demonstrate the new ways of working, and is able to make sure that in many circumstances, they step back, consciously think about what they were supposed to do, make the decision. Many of you would have read books which talk about how if you repeat the same thing 10,000 times, it becomes part of your muscle memory. Whether it's a forehand in tennis or a putt in golf, if you repeat the same stroke 10,000 times, it becomes part of muscle memory. Our job as a coach is to ensure that this desired changed behavior on the part of coachee becomes part of their mental memory. oh sorry, their muscle memory. Okay, so torrential one-way conversation, very little way of knowing how it went, but delighted to take questions if any part of it is not clear or somebody wants some clarifications. Sushma?
Yeah, sir. Thank you for the webinar, sir. We are just waiting for the questions. None of them have posted as of now. Let's wait for some time.
Sure. So does it appear in the box here or what?
Comes in the chat window, sir. Chat.
To the participants, I have a word of caution. If none of you has any questions or doubt, I'm going to go away assuming, my God, I'm so good, I'm crystal clear, everybody understood everything I said. So I don't want you to delude me with that. Please go ahead and ask questions.
So one question has come.
Yes.
From Radhika Suki. Can you see that question?
No, I can't.
Okay. It says, I think she has sent it to me. Okay. How do you deal with blind spots and unwillingness to change?
Yeah. Good question. In fact, the problem with blind spots is we don't even know we have them, right? And therefore, it goes through multiple steps, Radhika. The first is for the person to accept that they have a blind spot. There are a couple of ways of doing that. The simplest way is, one of course is conversational, right? For instance, the person says, well, you know, I'm really good at this, I've never failed at this, and if you're able to spot an instance that this has happened, they're obviously not willing to admit it to themselves, and there is a blind spot. A second way of doing that, you're familiar with the Johari window, that famous 2x2 BCG kind of matrix. And if you ask them to put down some of that, and some of the others who know them well to put down their perceptions, in one of those four boxes, what emerges is something which others are observing, but the coachee is not observed, right? And so those are the blind spots which now become apparent to the coachee. So the first important step in this is what I call as surfacing the blind spots. And you do that by asking other people in observation what they think are areas for the coachee to improve. And if the coachee believes that those are areas of strength for him and others believe it's an area of improvement, clearly that's a blind spot. The second part, there is a very interesting questionnaire on the web. It's free, so such of you who are interested for a lark can try it out. It is called Self-Limiting Belief Questionnaire, SLB. It has 100 questions. You just have to answer by circling one of two things. And there is a scoring method. And at the end of it, what it does is across 10 predetermined traits, it tells you which are the ones that you are you have a blind spot, where your self-limiting belief is so high that you're not willing to admit to yourself that certain things are happening, right? So the other way of doing it is through the questionnaire. Normally, the conversational bit is a better thing when it comes to organizations, because people are observing us all the time and they can see us for what we are, whereas very often, human tendency is to upgrade ourselves, have a higher opinion of ourselves than warranted. You know, my former boss, Raj Gopal, used to have a good joke that in a class, people are asked how many thought they were in the top 20 percentile. 80% of the class thought they were in the top 20%, right? So we all have a high opinion of ourselves. So conversation, people who know you very well, who have a chance to observe you and will give you genuine feedback, is the best way. Self-limiting belief questionnaire is another way of finding out what are some of the things which are strong beliefs which are actually stopping us from getting there.
Hello.
Yeah.
So there is one more question I have sent it to you from Satish Kumar Sridharan. I think you can see in your chat.
Okay, about CIF, which has
Yes,
laid down the
yes.
process. Can you please give me more information about this organization? Sure. Sridharan, so here it is. It's actually CF5, not CIF. Are you in logistics? Because CIF and onboard freights and all that is called joking. So the organization is called Coaching Foundation of India. You can find them on the web on cfi.in. Now it's based in Chennai, and there's a lot of material on the web. But I can very briefly tell you what it does. 2 times in a year they run a coaching certification program. Typically batches are of about 15 to 20 people. Okay, they go through a 1-year process. In the first month, for 1 week, you go to Chennai and go through classroom training, where you learn things like psychology 101, right? And especially coming from an engineering background, that's why I mentioned that those are eye openers. They become very important. They talk about the way human behavior science has evolved and so on. So that's the first week. Then in the second week, you learn a little bit more specific to coaching, including these psychometric testing and the 3-stage methodology of the skilled helper, right? And they tell you the theory behind all that happens. But the learning comes, this is for 1 more week in the second month. And the learning is, we are paired off into 2 people each or groups of 4. And when a situation is given, each of us then discusses with the other, we talk about our own experiences, and the other person critiques what you have said, and it becomes a self-learning opportunity. Once you have done that for the first 2 months, then you go back to, very often you come from outstation, but you go back to work, let us say. Over the next 10 months, you have to do 2 coaching assignments. Because we are coach interns with an elbow around our neck, normally it's expected to do pro bono coaching. Okay, you can't charge somebody because it's your learning curve that somebody else is a human guinea pig. But you have to do 2 normally we call it CEO coaching, but 2 CXOs are okay as well, 2 pro bono coaching. Now, in order to make sure that you're learning, you're doing a good job, you are assigned a supervisor. A very senior, experienced coach is given as your supervisor. And what you would do is sit with the supervisor maybe once in 2 months or 3 months, talk about all that you did, how you went about doing it, and the supervisor has an opportunity to critique you and point out areas for change and improvement, right? For instance, I have myself supervised over half a dozen coach interns by virtue of their seniority and experience. So the supervisor helps you with it. You do your engagement. Normally, the coaching lasts for 6 months. We have 1 session every month. Each session lasts typically 2 hours, right? So at the end of those 6 coaching sessions, and you've spoken to your supervisor and everything, hopefully you've made an impact on the coachee. The engagement comes to a formal end. There's a bit of documentation involved. Every session you will document. You also have to come up with 2 things. One is a case study of your coaching engagement with each of the coachee. Where was the coachee before? What was the agenda? What did you do? What was changed? You also have to write an essay on your own self-learning. What did you learn from it? How did it work out? What are the new things, etc., etc. You then give this to CFI. They have a board. They have a board of practitioners, very senior people, and you will then have to go do a viva and defend your your whole learning with the board. They might ask you deeper questions about your case studies, what you learned, and quiz you a little bit more about what methodology you use, what questionnaire you use, why did you use self-limiting belief instead of a via strengths kind of thing. And if they feel that you have done a good job, you pass the viva, then you become CFI. It's a private organization, so they can't give you a certificate, but they tell you you're accredited to CFI, right? So typically it takes 1 calendar month, 1 week in each first 2 months classroom, the next 10 months more or less working with your coachee from your place, And if you do a good job with the documentation and the Viva, you join the growing fraternity of CFI. There are over 300 coaches in India right now from CFI. I hope that answers your question. I have one more from Lokesh. Sushma, may I go on to that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So Lokesh asks, in your experience, what is the success rate of senior managers or leaders' ability to change? That's a tough one. In the sense that it's not as if, in fact, I'm one of the agenda for me in the following year is to do a CEO coaching survey status in India. But there aren't any formal surveys that have been done or published, so we don't have any figures as such. But purely from my own personal experience, if I were to talk about, it's fair to say that if there are 10 assignments I do, 3 or 4 assignments are outstanding successes. In other words, the coachee has actually got it, has made the effort, has changed, and has changed permanently. Right? How do you know? You go back 1 or 2 years, 3 years later, and the organization still thinks, well, possibly the guy has become a very senior person. So has made a lasting, permanent change. That's about 3 or 4 people. Another 3 or 4 people would definitely have understood the context. They know that they need to change. They would have attempted change. There would even be green shoots of change visible to the organization at that time. But 1 or 2 of them, when the coach is gone, do regress a little bit. Okay, 1 or 2 out of those 10, definitely 1 out of 10 is likely to not be able to make that change. And the reason is plenty. It may be family, it may be personal, it may be organizational, whatever. But it's fair to say that 5 to 10% of coaching assignments don't achieve the desired objective. So it's not as if it's always unqualified success. I have had, in all this 55, if I were to take my own personal experience, there was one which really failed. It failed in the sense the coachee always led me to believe that whatever we had agreed on, whatever we wanted to do was actually being done. And in reality, 3 months later when I met his chief executive, he said, you know, the guy is a very good actor. He will make you believe that all that is happening, but on the ground, he hasn't changed much. He is still his old bossy self, right? So only once I found personally, I would rate that as a failure. Most of the others, people have shown change. Degrees of change can vary from 10 to 100%. Okay, there's a question from Ajay Singh. How can we prevent slipping back post completion of coaching? Very, very good question and a very, very valid point. We all know about the proverbial tail of the dog, right? The curly tail, you can put that into a steel cylinder and it looks straight. The moment you remove the cylinder, it curls right back to its normal self. I did a little earlier refer to something called coach as a crutch. So as long as the coach is there, the coachee at least has external pressure. He says, Jesus, Dash is coming at 11 o'clock tomorrow, I better do something, right? So at least that need to be honest is there. But the answer is in 2-3 parts. One, the coachee themselves. If they are genuinely sold on change, if they see, look at the context. The organization is paying for it, but the person who is benefiting is the coachee. So if the coachee leaves, the improved coachee actually will benefit another organization, right? So the sponsor is the organization, the beneficiary is the coachee. And therefore, it's in the interest of organization to make sure that both are stuck to each other, right? Joined at the hips, as it were. And therefore, how much of stickiness do they provide, how much of engagement there is one part of it. The coachee's own personal mental makeup and honesty and desire is another part of it. The third is, rather than leave it to chance, post an assignment, every 6 months I go back. For instance, I mentioned about the boss senior person. I just completed a post-engagement 360. 5 months after the engagement was over, I went back to each one of those who provided the 360-degree feedback, thanked them for having provided it, for having inputs which help make my coachee different. And I asked them a question. Here is a dimension on which the coachee wanted to take. In the example I told you, it was risk-taking. One of the 3 dimensions was, say, risk-taking. So I said, if you looked at the coachee in say 2018, right, on the dimension of risk aversion, and if you look at the coachee in 2019, has the person shown any change? And I gave them a 5-point scale. The 1 was, in fact, worse than before. 2 is no change at all. 3, change but very, very marginal. 4, visible change. 5, transformationally changed. Right? And I asked them to rate this guy. Many of them have rated him anywhere from 2 to 4. In other words, they definitely see a change to somebody who says he has actually made big strides. Right? So when you go back and evaluate and then give this feedback to the coachee, supposing instead of between 2 and 4, most people are answering between 1 and 2, I would have to go back and tell the coachee, boss, either you're not trying hard enough or you have regressed, right? And so can we make sure that you get back to brass tacks? Truth is, once you're out of that engagement, you only have moral right to talk to the coachee. You have no organizational sanction, right? But nonetheless, because you would have struck up a very close rapport with the coachee, on Guru Purnima, some of them reach out to me and say, though you're my coach, I consider you a guru. Right? Very nice, touching sentiment. But it's important for you, therefore, to be able to stay in touch with them, formally go. And this is no cost to the organization. It's my own way of keeping tab on whether I've been successful. So you do an engagement 6 months after that. Marshall Goldsmith suggests that you do it every 6 months for the next 3 years. Right? So just to make sure changes become permanent. That's a way to try and see whether the person is not slipping back. Any others?
I think so. We don't have much questions. I think.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I think we can end the session.
All right. Thanks very much, guys. My email ID is on that. If any of you want to contact me, want to send me a feedback, comments, please feel free, or via alumni office. Okay. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Okay, Sushma, thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for presenting the webinar. Thanks a lot.
Have
Yeah.
fun. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.